welcome back to the Divine Path. Alright, today, first off, I hope everyone's doing well. Another day here on Earth. Very grateful for it. Being grateful, by the way, not to go too off topic. Look at that little cicada. What are you doing? You're all messed up. Little guy's looks like he's lost a wing or something. Looks like one of his wings is lost. We'll just go put him on a leaf, I guess. Anyway, what was I saying? Being grateful, right? It's very important, in my opinion, to be grateful, and that's whether you believe all this is from by chance, right? No matter what you believe or you resonate with, being grateful is going to give you a positive mindset, right? And that gives me another topic to go into: depression and mental health and all that, right? I think one of the biggest things you can do to beat depression is being grateful. Because when you're grateful for life, for the experience, right? When you're grateful for that, how can you be depressed? I mean, if you wake up and you're grateful just to be breathing and to be able to have this experience, no matter what your experience is, no matter if you're, no matter if you're going through a hard time, going through a breakup, someone in your family's died, so on and so forth. I mean, obviously it's going to be harder to be happy or content. Sometimes it's going to be harder to be that way than other times when things are going right. But if you can just be grateful for what you do have, I believe that's a great tool for, being content, being happy in this world. I mean, something I often think about is that just to be born, do you know how slim the chances are that you yourself will be born? I'll tell you, according to science, right, which maybe I shouldn't say this as a fact because science has, taught us a load of bullshit, a lot of lies, but science says, right, there's something like 10 million, or 5 to 10 million sperm per ejaculation, right? So that means you were one out of 5 to 10 million that, got to the egg first and were born and became a human being. So, if you buy into that's how things work, that there really is 5 to 10 million sperm and you were the one that made it, man, you've already won the lottery. You know what I mean? People out here, they want to win a lottery, they want to win some money. You've already won just to be here, to experience this life. you beat out 5 to 10 million others that could have had this place, could have had your place, right? When you know that, you realize how lucky you are just to be here and experience this world. Whatever this world is, right? Whatever you believe, whatever you resonate with, try to be grateful. It's very, very good for your mental health. Alright, that's out of the way. So the topic of today is going to be slavery. Because I've seen recently, people putting up things online, and I shouldn't really let things bother me, but when you just see things that are lies, it gets to me a little bit. Not really. It doesn't get to me in the way of, that it affects my life, but it's just a little bit annoying. When you see someone put up something about slavery, or they say white people did this, it's just like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. So I thought I'd speak my thoughts on slavery and all that jazz, just to get it down on, get it documented on my channel. So, slavery is basically a big psyop, right? It's a load of bullshit. I mean, the lies about slavery are endless. First of all, when people hear the word slavery in the Western world, but even outside the Western world, mainly in the Western world though, when we hear slavery, most people think of black slaves, right? African slaves being taken from Africa and brought to America, right? America. And people are taught that these people that were slave owners were white. They were all white Americans, and white people were extremely racist and blah 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 blah, right? That's the sort of narrative that gets pushed in the West, right? That's the narrative that gets pushed in the West. Africans were stolen from Africa. White people went there, they ripped Africans away, killed some, raped women, took slaves, got on a ship, took them to America, and tortured these slaves, treated them like shit, were racist, blah blah blah. That's the general slavery story that everyone is taught, right? There's several flaws to this. The number one flaw is that Africans were never stolen from Africa. There was a slave trade in Africa. What that means is, African leaders, African chiefs, they caught other Africans from other tribes and they had turned them into slaves, okay? A lot of Arabs had also got into the slave trade. First off, slavery goes back a long fucking way, right? When there were only small villages around, one village would go over, raid the next village and take slaves. Like, it's literally been going on since people started living in communities, basically the start of time. Since the start of time, human beings, right, we've always, you know, made slaves out of other people, and oftentimes of the same race. You know, this slavery thing didn't start with white people, with British people, with American people. It didn't start with them. It started, well, I don't know when it started, but whoever the first people were, or you know, when people first got into tribes and things, that's when slavery started. And it just grew bigger and bigger as there was more people in the world. And, you know, Arabs owned slaves, Africans owned slaves, white people owned slaves, Asians owned slaves, Jews, big slave traders, right? And that's one thing about America's slave trade, is that a lot of it was Jewish owned. You know, I don't think many people realize that. They think it was white people that ran all that slave trade. I believe it was 70% Jewish run, that specific slave trade, Africans going from Africa to America. It was about 70% of that trade was dominated by Jewish people. Right? Okay, another misconception is that in America it was all white slave owners. Again, no, it wasn't. Some were Jewish, and some, believe it or not, believe this or not, but some of the slave owners in America were black. I know it's shocking. It really is shocking. Not many people have heard that before, but it is true. It's a fact that black Americans actually owned black slaves. So my point there is, it's not the reason why slavery is taught the way it is about division. You know, in America right now you've got a black population, and you've got a white population, and you've got other populations, right? And this goes back to my first video that I did on this channel. Divide and conquer. This is what the elites, right, in quotations, elites, this is what they do. They divide and they conquer. So slavery is part of the way they divide, right? They teach in school, hey, white kids, you used to be slave owners. Black kids, you used to be slaves. And from early ages in American schools, they divide white and black people, right? That's their whole goal. And then they push it in media, right? They push it in media. They make endless shows and movies about slavery or that involve slaves. They stretch the truths, like in every slave movie ever made. Think Django. You know, the white people in charge of these slaves are just so... They're just like... They just make them these very evil characters that punish the slaves every day, whip them, put the dogs on them, so on and so forth, right? Which is completely untruthful. I mean, yes, that may have happened. That may have happened. There would have been some, right? In any society, there's always good and bad. So you're always going to have, you know, the slave owners that were complete assholes, that tortured their slaves, that beat their slaves, so on and so forth. Of course. But oftentimes these slaves were treated very well, right? White people, or as I've mentioned, black people, wanted some help. They wanted people to do labor on their farms, or pick cotton, of course, everyone's heard of that. So on and so forth. Or help raise their kids, feed their kids, clothe their kids, bath their kids, whatever, right? If they had the money to do it, then they would, buy a slave and get that slave to help them, right? But many of these people actually considered the slave more of a worker and part of their family than an actual slaves. There is many instances where, say a white person in America back in the day bought a slave, and that slave was given their own house, was fed very well, was looked after in return for the work they did, right? Which is basically, if you think about it, it's basically what an employed person has today. If you're employed by a company today, you go out, you work, and in turn, you've got money just for living. You've got money to have a roof over your head and food in your belly, and that's about it. So in other words, a lot of these slaves back in the day, especially the ones in America, but all over as well, a lot of the slaves throughout history have actually had just about as much rights as we do today. They might not have the choice of leaving if they choose to, but they live similar lives to an employed person in 2023. An employed person in 2023 literally can only afford to really go to work and pay the bills, and that's it. You can't afford luxuries, you can't afford anything else. That's what you get. Well, back in the day, a lot of slaves, they worked during the day. They were given a good meal, a good lunch, good dinners, good breakfast, comfortable housing. Excuse me. Comfortable housing. They had families, they might have got say 10 slaves, and some were male, some were female. Of course, there were slaves that got together and got married and had families, while as slaves, and they lived a very comfortable life. Listen, if you're listening to this, you might think, he's making it sound like slavery was good. No, I don't believe slavery is good or was good, right? If another human being is taking away your right to live in this world we're in the way that we want, obviously it's not a good thing. I don't believe in that. All I'm saying is that the picture they paint, the picture that the media and that schools paint, is that all these slave owners were just extremely racist, evil people that tortured their slaves, blah, 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 when really that was a very small percentage. That's all I'm saying. The evil ones were a very tiny percentage. Most of them just wanted slaves to do If you did a good day's work, hey, you were rewarded. You were, given a lot of rest time, fed very well. You could do whatever you wanted after you were finished with your work. So it's a misconception that all these slave owners were just so fucking evil. That's a total lie. I mean, if you don't believe it, just think, does it make sense to whip someone to do work? I mean, you're going to give them an infection if you hurt them too much. Their wound's going to get infected and then they can't work. The best way to get someone to work is to treat them well. Treat them, maybe be, strict, but still treat them well. Which was the case most of the time. Again, not sticking up for slavery, but it's a lie, what we've been told, the narrative, right? Okay. Now, next thing is, I'd like to say this. The only reason why American slavery, as in white Americans taking black slaves, is so well known, is because firstly, it's in recent times, right? It was 1800s when slavery was abolished, so fairly recent, but we're talking 170 years ago it got done over with, right? But it's the most recent in terms of blatant slavery, I would call it, because there's still slavery going on today, but we just don't see much of it. Okay, so yeah, and the other thing is, America is the country with the spotlight on it, right? So anything that happens in America gets a spotlight put right on it. Movies made about it, shows made about it, so on and so forth, taught in schools. Politicians bang on about slavery this, slavery that. And it just becomes ingrained in the culture. America's culture becomes ingrained in the rest of the world. Therefore, the story of their slavery gets just shoved down our throats, right? That brings me to my next point about it being the sort of the most recent. It's not really, because slavery is going on today. In Africa today, there are many slaves, right? Many slaves in Africa today. We don't give a fuck about them. Why aren't, instead of talking about slavery that ended 170 years ago, why aren't we talking about the slavery that's going on in Africa today, or India today, or the Middle East today, in certain Arab countries, or the sex slave industry, in which people basically kidnap girls, force them to be prostitutes under threats. I mean, there's thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, if not a few million girls that are in that situation, girls or women that are being forced to have sex day in, day out. They are a slave, and they are being forced to, prostitute themselves. Why isn't the media putting a spotlight on that? Why aren't they going, let's free these women or girls that are sex slaves? Children in some cases that are sex slaves. Why don't we have a spotlight on that? We've got a spotlight on something that ended 170 years ago, but we don't have a spotlight on women all around the world of all ethnicities being sold into sex slavery. Are you kidding me? Shouldn't we be trying to solve today's issue? Today's slavery? Why aren't we trying to solve that? Why are we looking at something 170 years ago and all these people calling for reparations, blah, 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 and all that history's fucking bullshit anyway? You know what I mean? Does anybody resonate with this? We've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of slaves in the modern era. But the media do not put spotlight on it. They don't fucking care. Yet they will talk all day about reparations from something that happened over 170 years ago. Incredible. Isn't that incredible? Okay, I'll end this with my last point, and that is slavery was universal, right? Forget this black people were slaves shit. Every race of people, black, white, Arabs, Asians, Indians, have been slaves and are slaves today. All races of people have been enslaved. The Arabs enslaved a lot of white people, right? The Muslim armies, the Turkish armies, they enslaved Europeans. Europeans enslaved other Europeans. Asians, Genghis Khan that conquered more area than anyone ever, right? Any empire ever. Genghis Khan from Mongolia. He conquered far more than the British conquered, but he's not talked about as an evil person. He enslaved millions and killed about 40 million. Genghis Khan's armies killed about 40 million people. They went around the world massacring whole villages and enslaving people, but you don't hear about that. There's been so much slavery throughout the whole world, in every country, involving every race. Every race have been slaves. So my point there is, how can one group of people, blacks in America, be asking for reparations, right? I mean, what if a white person said, hey, my ancestors were slaves to the Persians 600 years ago. I need reparations from the Persians. I mean, does it make sense? Of course not. Of course not. So my point with all this is, it's time to drop the slavery thing. In terms of back in the day, this slavery in America or slavery anywhere else, black people were slaves and treated poorly and need reparations. Drop all that shit, because that's a complete lie. First of all, there's so much lies surrounding it, and every race has been enslaved. Okay? So can we drop that? Is that possible that we can just drop it? I mean, imagine 100 years from now, if this slavery thing is still going on, we're still talking about it. I mean, when does it end? It's been 170 years. 170 years. How long do you want to keep it up? Right? So time to drop that. And what was the other point? That's the other point. Stop teaching it in schools. Stop dividing children Stop, teaching this bullshit where we go, Europeans were bad, they came along and enslaved people, or the Americans are bad, they enslaved people. Stop talking that absolute rubbish and dividing kids. If a black and a white and a brown kid all meet each other, and an Asian kid, they've got absolutely nothing wrong with each other. They get along. But as soon as you start talking, oh, your race did this to my ancestors back in the day, blah, 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 it's going to cause division. And as I said, that's their goal. So don't be divided by this whole race psyop, okay? And stop believing in reparations and slavery and all this nonsense. Drop it and care about the slavery going on today. Can we do that? Can we care about the people that are enslaved today, the millions of girls that are sex slaves today? I hope we can do that.